Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall event. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the continuing series of Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions. My guest today is Dr. Tim Rudolph from the CMMC Accreditation Body Board of Directors. We are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the Defense Industrial Base. And our focus, as you know, is on providing our focus as a service provider is on organizations seeking certification and providing them information they need to be ready to successfully pass CMMC certification. We have a pretty large audience today. I will encourage you to send in questions during the session in the Zoom Q&A window, and we will answer as many of those audience questions as we have time for today. First, I'm going to start with introduction of my guest, Dr. Tim Rudolph. So building on a career as a technology entrepreneur, Dr. Rudolph was a senior executive for the Air Force, including being CTO for the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center and the authorizing official for warfighter systems for U.S. Air Force Command and Control and Rapid Cyber Acquisition. So currently he's the founder and CEO of Third Millennium Group, and also importantly for us today, a member of the board of directors of the CMMC accreditation body. For CMMC AB, he is the secretary of that organization, as well as chairman of the nominations and the governance committee. Dr. Rudolph, thanks very much for joining us today. Today, our topic is some of the dissenting views around CMMC, some of the people who think maybe it's not the greatest idea that they've ever heard and have some concerns about how it's going to be rolled out. Before we dive into that, though, I would like to just take a moment and understand a little bit about your involvement in the CMMC initiative. As a senior civil service executive and now on the boards of many organizations, you're focused on informing and solving really large, important issues for the nation. So what specifically about the CMMC initiative made you decide to volunteer your time to the AB and get involved at this high level?
Well, first off, Ed, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate any opportunity, and the board as a whole does too, to get the word out on CMMC. There's enough chaff in the air and misconceptions, but we do want a very executable, implementable, reasonable approach to securing the industrial base. But so today is dissenting views, huh? Now I understand why I was voluntold to participate today. All the other guys got the easy thing. As you mentioned, I'm secretary in nominations and governance, but also a working director. For good or bad, the way we're setting this up is an external partner to the DoD. We don't have professional support yet, but so every director is like wearing multiple hats, including myself. We'll move into more of my typical board role, which is direct and protect versus doing all the heavy lifting. And there are people that have done much more heavy lifting than me, but it is active because, to your question specifically, why did I volunteer? It's really about the nation. The safety and security of the nation. As you know, statecraft is waged in many ways, and economic warfare can be as effective as a kinetic weapon on target in seeing an explosion. And even today, you can see impacts. Cyber attacks harassing scientists, conducting research from one corner. And today we heard about, just this morning, an embassy closing for stealing intellectual property, and you can't make this stuff up in the middle of a global pandemic. So it shows how different engagements, different relationships between countries and peoples can be more than just weapons. So securing that industrial supply chain, the industrial base, is critically important, not only for the DoD as a sector, but for the nation as a whole.
Thanks. One of the things we've been looking forward to, we've been doing this session weekly and getting great support from the CMMC accreditation body, is just keeping up on the news. What are the new things? So is there any top of mind news that's coming out of the accreditation body that you'd like to share with us before we get into some of the dissenting view questions?
Sure. Maybe I'll try to hold this news part so we don't get to the dissenting, but actually that's actually more important than probably my news. The first order of news is that, and it's fairly significant, that OMB is looking to put its rules change on the book and introduce that in the October timeframe. And then there'll be a comment period that will run through December 2020. Now, this is, of course, like any schedules in the government of the DoD, having remembered it fondly, is subject to change. But the significant part is 800-171 migrating beyond simply the DoD and having more applicability more broadly is part of the rules change. So it's more than just the department. We've also seen some mentions of CMMC in different contracts already, which is a little ahead of our planned timeline, which we can go into a little later. But for GSA and the STARS 3 contract is kind of a prep to prep, get ready to go on CMMC and minimal security requirements. It's not a requirement now, and as an umbrella contract, it may only be implemented in certain subsets as they're executed. But it's becoming more prominent, not only in our kind of building the airplane as we go, but in reality in contracts. And of course, the real driver of CMMC from an adoption standpoint is to competitively the DoD marketplace to have that to be awarded a contract. I have a little more news and I'll share a screen real quick if that's okay.
Sure thing.
And hopefully this will work. The bigger news now in terms of our organization, the accreditation body, is that we have a number of activities that are now open for business, open for registration, and we're starting through those. So as you can see, we have registered practitioners, registered provider organizations, certified professionals, which is a minimum to achieve certified assessors at different levels of maturity, and C3PAO's initial applications have been taken. They're still rolling, they're still available. They all have certain different requirements. Additionally, the licensing partner publishers is also available for registration. And we're pretty jazzed, to use a term, to see so many registrations so far. I would tell you how many, but I don't know offhand, and I hate to do math in public. But each of those has a separate, separate requirement. Some, like the registered practitioners and the registered provider organizations, are required U.S. persons, which is slightly different than U.S. citizens. It could include things like people with green cards and other relationships. But for the certified activities, all those are U.S. citizens, including the C3PAOs for U.S. ownership, or in the case of C3PAOs in other countries, the alignment with that country's ownership. And we have more on the way. We have licensed training provider will probably drop next. Then we'll have certified master instructors and certified quality auditors. But we're going through this motion, and the registrations are great, but we do have significantly some work to do, and we're starting out provisionally and moving forward. So we're all learning at the same time. And I think you'll find our site is becoming more populated with materials, and that's been a reasonable issue that we haven't been necessarily communicating all the information. That causes consternation, and maybe some even some dissenting views. But we're on our way. We're building the plane in flight, and the news in that regard is good because we're building that organization. I'll bring myself back to here, and let's continue it if you have.
Great, Tim. Yeah, thanks. So for the most part, our audience is made up of early adopters, right? Those are people who see CMMC as a path to differentiate themselves from their competitors by doing a really good job at cyber. So for the most part, We NeoSystems certainly, our customers, the people who attend these meetings, are for the most part very enthusiastic about CMMC and see it as a way to raise the bar. But that said, there's some people out there who have raised some concerns about how it's being done, what the impact is going to be on the defense industrial base, in particular small and mid-sized businesses, and how they need to adapt to these new requirements. So I'd like to put some of those out there and get your response to some of those concerns. I will caveat by saying that these are not necessarily dissenting views from within our company. We are very much a part of the CMMC ecosystem and therefore sponsoring these events. But we are doing a lot of listening, as you are, to some of the views out there. So I think it's important to understand those views and hear how CMMC is addressing some of those in many cases very valid concerns. So the first one I'll mention is that there's those who feel that CMMC is a barrier to entry for small and mid-sized businesses who might want to do business with the DoD. And the concern is that barrier is going to limit the DoD's access to some of the most innovative ideas happening in our country right now. So while on the one hand, CMMC wants to protect against intellectual property theft, we also don't want to squelch intellectual property development by those most innovative companies. And certainly, the cyber hygiene requirements of CMMC are a step above typical commercial practice. So for most companies that would want to do business with the DoD that are not already at that standard, they're going to have to do some uptake. What is CMMC doing to make the certification, achieving the certification, maintaining the certification accessible to those companies that might not be very sophisticated in the world of cyber, but might bring a lot to the table in terms of innovation?
That's a great question, and it's a very solid concern. And I think it's a concern of our board and the accreditation body, if only because the majority of the board is small business, and recognizing my old job fostering innovative businesses and ideas was a significant part of that. That innovation needs to continue. And I'll probably bring up again later that I do typically repeat that small business, innovative small business is basically the backbone of the nation, and we need to look at that and preserve it. Now, I would say though, however, and this is somewhat of a personal view, that any business, any small business, level 1 and moving to level 2, I would suggest that every company should be there. It's the number of controls, the basic activities for hygiene. To be in business today, forget about any DoD contracts. That would be in my opinion, the minimum. So I think if anything, it's fostering the basic hygiene for multiple small companies who probably require it more than most. But as well, there's like your company. Just yesterday, we were talking to the North Carolina Military Business Center and their tech transition arm of the state. There are many organizations that are going to help with on-ramping companies and advising them. And that was one reason we created this registered practitioners and registered provider organization categories, because it's not as stringent, the training isn't as deep as the certified professionals and assessors, but it provides that ecosystem that you mentioned that allows small companies to basically get the information they need, take the basic steps that are required, and do it in a manageable way. And we are concerned about costs. And of course, one good part of I mentioned OMB rules change, and also the NDAA includes funding for small business. So I think the support structure and the promise that Katie made to the larger community in supporting small business is going to be there. And again, we want an objective standard that people can meet. It's executable, it's understandable. And that's probably the biggest differentiator from the large number of very complex requirements today, which are there whether they're known or followed or not. But we're trying to focus and make that consumable.
Well, the level of clarity that's there already, and again, we haven't even seen everything out yet, is way ahead of what was there in NIST 800-171. And having worked with a lot of clients that are trying to understand what that means, the examples, the clarifications, et cetera, certainly have helped that. And so I think, yeah, there's some good strides being made there for sure. So speaking of the standard, CMMC has brought in other standards, sort of trying to make the best of breed, if you will. The roots are definitely in the existing NIST standards, but it is DoD specific. It does bring in things from elsewhere. It has some things that exist really only in CMMC in terms of being a firm requirement. There are those who say this is not a great idea to create a new standard that's just for the DoD when NIST has the standard making role for the government. Why does CMMC feel it's important to create a new standard based on what's already out there? There's certainly a lot of publications on the NIST website. Why do they feel it's important to create a new standard, and how do you expect the certifications to be recognized maybe outside the DoD? Like, is there going to be a benefit to people who do this, who may do business elsewhere beyond DoD?
Sure. Well, I think as we discussed, it's kind of a consolidation of the existing body of knowledge in a way that's consumable, understandable. Our partners with the DoD are the standards bearers through the DoD models and the assessment guides that we're supporting directly. But the fact that it needs to be understandable, objective, and usable, I think makes it available. There's nothing unique to the Defense Department that wouldn't be unique to, say, the Department of Homeland Security. If they were looking at adoption, we've had conversations with NASA, for instance, and it seems like it would be directly usable in different parts of the federal government, although those are all in process, no announcements today. So even though it is a DoD standard through the DoD CIO, it's not, again, unique only to DoD organizations. It's in our interest to have the ecosystem that not only supports companies seeking DoD contracts, but for every company in other contracts, and including long-term internationally. So we're looking at a number of those activities as well.
So let me jump to the other end of the spectrum. We were talking about companies that maybe are weak and maybe not doing things that you say essentially all companies should probably be doing. What about those companies on the other end of the spectrum? Those companies that have already made a pretty significant investment in cyber, and they're maybe lined with previous things that were out there, ISO 27001, FedRAMP, SOC 2, those kind of things, where they've made the investment, they've been looked at, they've demonstrated the maturity. There's been talk of some reciprocity between those frameworks and CMMC. Does it make sense to subject those companies to a separate certification process for their DoD work, or is there a thought that maybe those other efforts could be recognized?
Well, it's in everyone's interest to leverage as much as we have through other work, and you mentioned this before, and the reality is the risk management framework they put out is very broad and needs to be tailored for specific uses like the DoD adoption, and so these other standards can also be looked at different controls that are relevant to the CMMC standard. I'll tell you, it's confusing for everyone because there's reciprocity in many dimensions, talent, and we've found a number of FedRAMP assessors looking to also do CMMC activities. But if you break it into three categories, or I would break it into three categories, you kind of have infrastructure, you have policies and the business of managing content, and then the content itself. And there's really not one-stop shopping that you can outsource everything to one group, in Amazon, Azure, whatever. That may be a piece of the puzzle, but it's not. It doesn't include the policies and the procedures, which, as you know, SOC 2 focuses on in many ways. The infrastructure may be more focused from the FedRAMP perspective. And the content and management of that just needs to be communicated and written down so we know where it is. So it isn't, we're looking for the adherence to the standard where it's applicable. So not only is there not only a one-stop shopping for outsourcing inside a company, there are subsets that need to be relevant to managing control on classified information and contractual information. So it's, again, there are controls in those other standards. We're looking at the maximum reuse as possible. It's in everybody's interest. A lot of people have invested significantly to meet those controls, and those will be taken into consideration. And where we're going to practice that is in the provisional assessments that are coming up, and looking at big and medium and small companies and how they've implemented those controls. So we'll be better able to gauge what is most directly relevant to the certification that would be given through CMMC.
Cool, thanks. The next question is about timeline, and I think there's a 5-year rollout. Given the large number of companies, 300,000 plus, there's some who think that's even maybe a little bit aggressive. I've got an audience question that really talks about what we're going to do in the near term. I'm going to work this one in. It says, the question is, it seems like actual C3PAOs are not going to be ready to assess industry until early 2021, first quarter 2021. It seems like self-certifying is the approach until that is stood up. So, I mean, we are self-certifying now under the current DFARS requirement. So is that in line with where you're thinking the timeline is going to be as far as getting assessors trained, the first batch, and getting them out there doing some assessments?
Yeah, so hopefully the immediate schedule is up on the screen, and it's a long road to 2025, and even 2025 won't be assessments at all maturity levels for everything, or the highest maturity level. There'll be only a small subset of companies that are directly relevant to that level of maturity. But despite our current COVID-19 crisis, we have made significant progress. And the recognition that there's a catch-22. You can't have assessors doing work without C3PAOs aligned to that, and you can't have C3PAOs without assessors and understanding and training. And so there's this ecosystem from a delivery perspective is the catch-22. But we're making progress on all those fronts. And what's going to happen is that a number of the directors will be part of that initial class of getting the preparation up. Now, for ethics reasons and nominations and governance has ethics squarely in its job jar as a committee on the accreditation body. The individual directors can't be certified assessors themselves, and there are requirements and constraints because we don't want any conflicts of interest. But they are going to be helping the provisional class stand up and roll. The number of assessments will be in the small double digits looking into winter, spring 2021. So we have a little ways to go. I wouldn't say that anyone can self-assess CMMC, but they can certainly get ready to be assessed for CMMC. And we're encouraging through our registered providers and our growing number of what will be certified providers, professionals, and assessors, that work start soon. 2025 may seem like a long way away, but it really isn't in terms of a security horizon. And of course, there's an incentivization for companies to get on that bandwagon simply because they want to be, if they get an award for a contract, they want the certification that says they can actually receive that award. But it's a growing process, and it's, I think, right-sized to grow, learn, and make it more efficient and effective as we get in past winter, spring 2021.
Very good, thanks. So one of the things we've heard is that the CMMC standard will be pass-fail, meaning that if a company doesn't fully meet the standard, they won't get certified. So the idea is that, as you mentioned earlier, it's supposed to be a certifiable standard, so it has pass-fail criteria. Is there any notion of exceptions or provisional certification that might be possible? Certainly, as you were an authorizing official for the Air Force, I know you've seen a lot of POAMs, right? And the Absolutely. Reality that virtually no system meets every single control at all points and all times, right? It's just not the reality. Right. So how does that get handled in terms of how close to perfection do you need to get a pass? And if you're having some issues, how does that get adjudicated between the assessor and the CMMC AB? And is there any room for someone to make a risk decision?
Sure, sure. And we are talking about security, more, not only checkbox compliance. So this issue has come up repeatedly, and we want to look at how to manage that. The certification itself is 3 years, and a lot changes within those 3 years themselves. But as you mentioned, as a prior DAA and AO for ATO's authority to connect provisional authorizations, I guess my biggest approach was that it's an open book test, and it is very hard to pass even with the open book test. And there are things that can use continuous improvement. Some things are risk decisions, which gives you flexibility because you're going to be doing continuous monitoring or improvement as means to reduce the risk or mitigate the risk as you go. Currently, it is to receive a contract, you have to meet the certification. However, if you're assessed and work through that process, it isn't, and you don't pass one of the controls, it isn't like you go back to zero, go back to don't collect $200, don't pay $200. You don't want to pay a lot if you're going to start. You don't start from scratch. There will be provisions to make sure that whatever those corrections are can be done in a reasonable amount of time, or managed in a way that it's a risk management decision and not only a compliance checklist. So that's a hot topic. We're working very closely with our DoD partners to clarify that. We want it as clarified as the community that's on this discussion, and I'd say stay tuned, but it's on our mind, and I'm glad you put it in the historical context. For me, it was there wasn't a weapon system or a rapid agile cyber system that didn't have even category 1 issues, but there were ways to manage that, and we could manage that in a way that made it successful and useful to the mission, even though it wasn't perfect.
Sure. And I'll just give, we just have a short bit of time, a minute or two left, but I'll just give one example. Some of the CMMC requirements, if you take them literally, they're very challenging to implement on a 100% basis. So some of the controls are fairly fundamental and you can meet the spirit of it, but some are, technical in nature. FIPS 140-2 validation of cryptography, for example. In the real world, this is really problematic. Virtually all systems ship with that mode disabled. So for every existing system, you have to retrofit that configuration unless you happen by some luck to have turned it on back when you built the system. So, for a lot of companies that have legacy systems in place, that's a retrofit to meet that. FedRAMP, for example, has a way to relax certain requirements if you have a bona fide operational requirement, and there's a way for the authorizing official to recognize that. So in the CMMC world, is that something that you would envision the assessors would be empowered to consider those kind of situations, or is the company expected to make those risk acceptance decisions as part of running their security program? Like, where does that, the equivalent of the AO in the DoD or the government sense, where does that power to assess what makes sense and what doesn't reside in the CMMC world?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I'd go back to what we talked about earlier. There's content, and we know the CUI, CI is a small subset of a business's activity. The processing and storage of that and the infrastructure may be a small part of a company's infrastructure. And the policy, it may only be handled or used by a certain subset of people. So if the idea is the whole company does everything all the time, meeting all the controls, that would be very hard even for a small company, never mind a large company with many business units. So applicability is important, and it's kind of following the chain. Where's the content? How is it managed? Where is it stored and processed? And downscoping the problem to that, even though it would be great if everybody met the highest level of maturity for all things, but we do have to be more reasonable to consider what the actual content is and how that's managed. So that makes the problem tractable, not easy necessarily, but it's executable. And there'll be discussions of how those controls are implemented and what the scope of the controls are. And there'll be some recognition that companies are different. However, we're trying to make a very objective standard so that we don't have a favoritism to one company or another by an assessor or through the final certification through the accreditation body. So we're going to, I guess the bottom line is it's going to be as crisp as possible. We apply it where it's appropriate, and we try to do it without exceptions, but and we're working through your earlier question, the POAM type question, to see how we can manage that as part of an overarching process to keep and maintain, to get and maintain that 3-year certification.
Tim, thank you very much. We are at the end of our short 30-minute time frame, so I have a bunch of questions from the audience that I've not had a chance to get to. We may want to schedule a follow-on session. I appreciate your willingness to take on what these dissenting views are. Obviously some of the harder questions, right? These are the thorny issues. If they were simple, they would have been baked into the initial concept, and so they're things that have kind of rolled downhill to be dealt with as the devil's in the details part of the program, where the CMMC AB is spending, I think, a lot of your time. So I appreciate the efforts of you and all the others on the board in trying to resolve these so that it is workable for those of us who need to implement it in the
well. I can tell
practice.
You not only thank you for having me, but as part of the board and how we work and what we're trying to do is not create a system or an ecosystem supporting it which isn't executable. We care about all parts of the industrial base, supporting the defense sector as well as others. But whether it's small companies, mid-size, or large companies, we care about the entire industrial base. If we want success, that goes back to the open book test. We want companies to be successful. We want to be secure. We don't want to make it costly, prohibitively costly or complex to do that. So that's in our mind, and everything we do, everyone we talk to, and our partnership with the DoD. So hopefully we're tracking with that, and we're building a good path to success in that regard.
Well, Dr. Rudolph, thank you very much for taking time today. And for those in the audience, thank you for taking your time. Hopefully this was very valuable to you as you prepare for successful CMMC certification sometime in the near, or certainly somewhat near future. So thanks again. We are doing these on a weekly basis. Please join us for future sessions focused around CMMC. We will be hearing from both the accreditation body directors as well as other special guests that are helping us to sort out and understand how to deal with CMMC in a successful way. So our next session is Wednesday, July 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Please keep an eye out for invitations and register for that event. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.